Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, welcoming you to another episode of my weekly fighting game history show known as Fighting Game Thursday. Pretty much since this show's inception back in August of last year, we have been intermittently, chronologically, looking at every single entry in the Capcom Versus series. There was a lot of games to cover, but finally we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, with only a couple more entries to get through. Today we are going to be taking a deep dive look at Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, the first game in the Marvel and Capcom fighting sub-series to be released that was a revamped reiteration of a previous installment. Releasing revised versions of existing games had always been a trope when it came to the Street Fighter series, but until this point we had never seen Capcom apply such an update to a Marvel vs Capcom game. So in this video we will look at why this happened for the first time ever, explore the new features the Ultimate Edition of the game offered consumers, and discuss why the shelf life of this game was limited at points. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 and why it disappeared. Yeah. To understand the significance of Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, we need to understand the significance of its predecessor, Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds. The game's original incarnation, Fate of Two Worlds, was released in early 2011 and was the long-awaited sequel to Marvel vs Capcom 2, a game that was released all the way back in the year 2000. Marvel vs Capcom 2 is a beloved chaotic sprite-based title featuring a huge roster of 56 characters from everyone's favourite Capcom and Marvel properties. On release, it legitimately was the most ambitious crossover in history, offering a play experience that would be difficult to ever be topped. The 11-year gap between installments was partially down to Capcom spending a period of time moving away from the fighting game genre, feeling that the market for this style of games had become oversaturated and that mainstream gamers had moved on to other things. Midway through the noughties though, they were proven wrong, as the re-release of Street Fighter 2 on the Xbox Live service proved extremely popular, which would inspire them to make and release Street Fighter 4, which proved to be the most popular game in the series since the original release of Street Fighter 2 back in 1991. Fighting games were back, so it would only be a matter of time before Capcom would bring back Marvel vs Capcom as well. Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds was an interesting release, as although the game would go on to receive mostly critical praise, many fighting game fans would still see Marvel vs Capcom 2 as the best entry in the series. The main factors that would contribute to this fault track was that many gamers felt the new 3D graphical style was ugly in comparison to the predecessor's sprite-based graphics. There was also some criticism from more seasoned fighting game players with regards to the game's controls, which had been simplified from a button layout used in Marvel vs Capcom 2, which was originally a 4-button layout, but in Marvel vs Capcom 3's case a 3-button layout was used. This decision was made in trend with most modern fighting games of the era, which were designed to win the casual market back by knocking down the wall of complicated controls and opening up the field of strategic fighting to all comers. However, this new wave of gameplay was not welcomed by everyone with open arms. Whilst the gameplay and graphics were not everyone's cup of tea, neither were the characters in many instances either. The Marvel vs Capcom series pretty much started out as a Street Fighter spin-off, with the first entry in the whole series being X-Men vs Street Fighter. This meant that previously the roster in every title had been very Street Fighter heavy, which made perfect sense considering this was a fighting game franchise. Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds on the other hand had very few Street Fighter characters, and most of the roster chosen for this game by Capcom were not from fighting games at all. It seems strange that you could not play as Ken in this game, but you could play as the likes of Chris Redfield. The roster was smaller than Marvel vs Capcom 2, with a base of only 36 fighters. Many involved did not exactly scream fighting games either, which as a result would lead to many people finding the game less appealing. Despite the game's flaws, there was still a lot to be appreciated about Marvel vs Capcom 3, and Capcom were planning to expand on the game further by increasing the game's roster via the implementation of DLC. a feature that would not have even been possible during the days of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, so there was an interesting future ahead for the already critically acclaimed title. Development on DLC would take place throughout 2011, however an event would occur that would shake the very foundations of this process, ultimately resulting in most of the DLC being cancelled, with the exception of the ability to download players like Jill Valentine, Shu Gorath, and a few costume packs. Basically, development would be interrupted by Japan being hit with the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, an undersea mega thrust earthquake off the coast of Japan that occurred on Friday the 11th of March 2011. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, and the fourth most powerful earthquake in the world since modern record keeping began in 1900. The chaos these events would inflict on the nation of Japan would massively disrupt the development cycle of the downloadable content. However, as is often the case, destruction births creativity, and as a result the delayed additional content would be fleshed out further to create an additional standalone title that would retail at a discounted rate from that of the original. This new game, titled Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, would hit shelves at the tail end of 2011 and would obviously feature a number of changes to differentiate it from what came before it. At the game's heart, the ultimate version of this game is still very much Marvel vs. Capcom 3. The arcade fighting style remains largely the same, as does the game's 6-person tag team mechanics, along with the character's assists, special moves and hyper combos. All of these features make a welcome return. Holla holla holla! Instantly, people who have played both versions will notice some aesthetic changes. For example, the character and stage selection screens have been completely redesigned. In fact, there are a lot of small changes and details, some of which we shall cover. However, the game's most striking new feature is a largely expanded character roster, which is probably the main feature that would have inspired some consumers to buy Marvel vs. Capcom 3 again so quickly. Being a Marvel vs. Capcom game, the title offers a balanced selection of new fighters coming from each entity, 6 from Marvel and 6 from Capcom, offering consumers a whopping new 12 characters to choose from, as many characters as what are in Street Fighter 2 to begin with, so a decent amount. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the character selection in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was probably not as strong as the second entry, and once again, as is true to the rest of the game. These 12 new fighters have a fair amount of obscure characters included within them, so let's quickly cover the new additions to the lineup. First, on the Capcom side of things, we have Strider Hiryu, a character who was in the older Marvel vs. Capcom games, but was not included in the earlier version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. This character from the Strider series makes his return to the MVC franchise here. Bizarrely, whilst Ken from Street Fighter 2 is not selectable, players can now play as Phoenix Bloody Right from Ace Attorney, as nothing says hard bastard like a suit-wearing rookie defense attorney. At least we can't accuse Capcom of being unimaginative with their roster. Virgil makes his debut in this game, and he is more pissed off than ever after no one went to visit his stand after that convention. As great as it would be to see the real version of Virgil in this game, sadly it's just Virgil from Devil May Cry. At least this character fights, I suppose. Frank West from Dead Rising also makes his MVC debut here, after already appearing in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom at an earlier date, and Nemesis T-Type from Resident Evil 3 also makes their fighting game debut here. To round off the Capcom offerings, finally we have Firebrand, originally from the Ghost and Goblin series, who would go on to receive their own spin-off series down the line known as Gargoyle Quest, at least a more intimidating fighter than the likes of Arthur. On the Marvel side, we have Doctor Strange, who I was familiar with in my childhood due to watching the Fox Kids Spider-Man cartoon. We have Ghost Rider, who I suppose was topical at the time of the game's release, bearing in mind the character was portrayed in a movie that year by Nicolas Cage, Hawkeye, a member of the Avengers who had appeared in a Thor movie that year, Iron Fist, a user of martial arts and the wielder of a mystical force, Nova, a member of the intergalactic police force known as the Nova Corps, and Rocket Raccoon, who was an extremely prominent member in the 2008 relaunch of the superhero team Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe it's me being an old man, but even with the new additions to the Marvel vs Capcom 3 roster, I massively preferred the characters who were in Marvel vs Capcom 2. It seems like most of the roster chosen for the Marvel vs Capcom 3 games were chosen for product placement purposes, with the hope of promoting modern movies and games, rather than trying to focus on characters with charm and actual lasting appeal. In fact, after drawing these inferences whilst producing this video, I soon learned, according to Seth Killian, a former community manager at Capcom, that Capcom's bizarre character offerings were introduced to bring combat diversity to the game. For example, Capcom wanted a monster-like character that could fight whilst in the air, which is why Firebrand was introduced. Most of the new Marvel characters, on the other hand, were simply chosen for the game to cross-promote upcoming products, much like what I suspected in the first place, which is why I gather they lack a bit of soul. According to Capcom, many new features and refinements were the result of fan feedback from the Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of the Two Worlds game. In terms of these refinements, combat mechanics were tweaked. For example, combat was made more balanced and the X Factor mechanic has been adjusted so that characters can use it whilst airborne instead of just on the ground. X Factors grant players with an increased damage output, speed and health regeneration for a limited time during combat. The game's aerial exchange feature was also tinkered with so that players can either remove a meter from their opponent's hyper combo gauge, add a meter to their own gauge, or simply deal more damage, mixing things up slightly. In addition to the game's previous installments play modes, in the Ultimate version of the game there was also new play modes added too, and a feature known as Heroes Herald, which was a free downloadable. This was a mode where players could earn new abilities, customise their characters with new powers and compete in factions as either the heroes defending Earth or as one of Galactus' heralds. New abilities were gained in this play mode by collecting what was known as ability cards, which feature various characters from the Marvel and Capcom universes. Up to 3 of these different cards could be equipped at once, with over 100 existing to collect. A new offline mode was included too, known as Galactus mode, allowing players to fight as Galactus against AI controlled opponents, which added a little more variety to the experience. Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 also provided smoother online play than that of Fate of the Two Worlds, which was possible due to the second version of the game offering an optimised netcode. A spectator mode was included too to allow up to 6 players to watch online matches, and rematches and leaderboard functionality was added to the game as well. IGN would cover the release of this game, stating that the previous Marvel vs Capcom 3 game was a great fighter that pushed the series forward in many ways, but drew criticism for a lack of modes and a smaller fighter roster than its predecessors. They also said, Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 makes all the customary moves for a Capcom update, bringing in new fighters, new stages and a few additional features while retaining the crazy sense of style that gives the series distinction in the fighting game genre. The new changes will be great for hardcore fans of the franchise. The inclusion of the new characters is definitely a welcome addition that rectifies one of the main issues with Marvel vs Capcom 3, but the game is still pretty light on new modes. Graphically, Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 has the same stylish look as Marvel vs Capcom 3, which is great. What the characters lack in detail, they make up for in personality, and the brightly coloured and intense special effects give the game a unique sense of style and a near seizure-inducing visual pop and flair. The crazy characters and insane special combos and moves make Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 a visual treat that stands alone against other fighters out there. As you can see, IGN loved Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, but what did others think? GameSpot would state, Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 introduces a host of unique characters and gameplay tweaks that change the game's formula for the better. They would be a little more critical than IGN though, summarising that, ultimately, Ultimate is still a monster hiding under an attractive coat of flashy combos and familiar characters. It may feel inviting at first, but sink a little deeper and you discover a game in which victory and defeat hinge on a fine line. It's a high risk, high reward system that buries you in a brightly coloured light show on the slightest misstep. Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3 is unquestionably the superior version, and while its feature set still feels lacking compared to other available fighters, the series' unique blend of structured insanity remains strong. Whilst a previous version of the game had appeared on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Ultimate marked the first Marvel vs. Capcom game in the franchise to be released on a handheld. A full console version of the game would arrive on the PlayStation Vita, which received heavy praise for its technical performance, visual fidelity and faithfulness to the home console counterparts. Now, as mentioned earlier in the video, this would be a game that would end up disappearing. Basically, after being on the market less than 2 years, the game would be removed from online stores due to an apparent expiration on the Marvel contract Capcom held. It soon transpired that the key reasoning behind the events that had unfolded was due to Marvel owners Walt Disney choosing to stop Capcom from licensing the game rather than renewing it as originally intended. Disney's reasoning for this was that they wanted to optimise the Marvel IPs exclusively in their own games, their self-published Disney Infinity series, which, to put it simply, was kind of a shameless rip-off of Skylanders. The same stunt that Nintendo would shamelessly pull off too, when they would release the Amiibo range. Like Nintendo, Disney could smell money here, and Marvel figurines would make perfect little collectibles. As great as this plan would sound on paper though, it would ultimately result in a huge business blunder for Disney, as 3 years later, on March 10th, 2016, Disney would end their Infinity line, declaring the product line over due to a lack of growth in the toys to life market and increasing developmental costs. They would even close down Avalanche Software and Disney Interactive Studios as a whole, showing as wealthy as the company that they were not good at self-publishing their own video games. Surprisingly and awesomely, this would result in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 being re-released digitally for the PlayStation 4 in 2016, followed by an Xbox One digital release in 2017, and even some physical copies being manufactured for this next-gen hardware for a limited time. Now that Disney had switched their business model video game wise back to a licensing only model, this allowed them to license their characters back to Capcom once more, the company who had always done a fantastic job when it came to using Marvel characters, meaning it would not be the end of the Marvel vs. Capcom series just yet. The franchise was in great hands and surely nothing could go wrong with the next installment in the series. We will look at Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite on this channel very soon. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, the game that disappeared. I hope you had fun learning more about this installment today, and tune in the future when I cover the Infinite game. Let me know in the comment section what you think of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and how well you feel it measures up to Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Post your thoughts down below. These videos are predominantly funded by the channel's fans, who choose to back its existence over on Patreon. If you would like to receive all videos before everyone else, receive content advertisement free, receive production credits at the end of these videos, access to the channel's Patreon Discord, get weekly exclusive vlogs from myself, and see handhelds around the world 1 month before anyone else, then consider joining our amazing community over on Patreon. Memberships start as little as just $1 a month. That's a lot of incentives for such a small price, and more importantly, you are helping this channel continue to grow. Yeah! Huge thank yous and shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Heo, Paula Lopez, Joseph Rasmek, Doug Perkins, Ego, Alethea Swanson, Angelite85, Asobi Kwang DX, Ezra Warakai, Brian Barry, Cambo Rambo 82, Carlos Domingos, Computer Man, Daniel Daly, ECU Professor, Gary Pinkett, Gianni V. Santizi, Glennie Glenn, Hamid Musa, House of a Ted, Joaquin Varela, Jordan Durant, Keith Ferguson, Lars Zondervan, Matthew Robinson, Michael Cullix, Nick Daniels, Philip Manth, Prince Knight, Princess Zana, Spuds Matt B, Timothy W. Haskins II, TOG Driver, Since Spaces, A Murder of Crows, Adam Castin, Adrian Hannington, Andis Brainsberg, Andrew Bazansky, Andrew Pearson, Antonio Rodriguez, Bernard MG, Bubba Kitty, Chris Fisk, Chris Margarine, Chris Cool, Craig Jenkins, Crazy Jarl, Dan Barlow Jr., Dan Van Dam, David Bow, Francesco Lacriola, Gregory Smoradiewicz, Hans Christian, Ivan M, Jake Whitford, James Bishop, James McDonald, JB, Jazzy Tay, Joel, John Bates, Kings Knight, Langston Miller, Lobster Puncher, Luis Viant, Luke Canava, Marco Soto, Marvin Araliga, Master Jinx, Matthew Rindle, Me Machine Dean, Michael Hall, Mike Bruno, Noob, Paul Elliott, PlayStation's Better, Post DXL, Punky Dudester, RetroVersion.com, Richard Stew Stewart, Rick67, Ron Studd, Sarah Powell, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Stephen Lewis, Time Lord Soundwave, Tom Elliott, Vlamink Renee, Weatherjugs, Zai. Thank you all so much for continuing to support this channel, along with everybody else who supports me on Patreon, and all of those who are also listed down below. You're making this train roll. Choo choo choo.